senta benissimo.
Ok, adesso la sentiamo, le faccio cenno quando può smettere.
Ah sì sì. Sono chiusa, benissimo. Grazie a voi. Cominciamo. Quale prendo? Which? No. Good morning everyone. First of all, thank you for coming to this meeting. ENPE and ANAC decided to dedicate this the event to the discussion of the proposed directive, EU proposed directive on anti-corruption, as we think that this is a real turning point in the fight against corruption in Europe. So thank you again. We are in this beautiful place. I'm sure everyone is in awe. And for this reason, we thanks for that the Chamber of Commerce of Rome. And I would like to invite, as a first speaker, Mr. Maurizio Rea, who is the Vice Secretary of the Chamber of Commerce, our host.
Ci siamo. Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti, buongiorno Presidente Busia, buongiorno ai suoi ospiti e a tutti quanti voi. Per noi, Camera di Commercio, oggi è un grande piacere, un grande onore ospitarvi per, l'istituzione che ha organizzato questo evento e anche per il tema che viene trattato. Un tema sicuramente importante, un tema delicato e quindi che ci riguarda tutti quanti, ma mi ha colpito una cosa in modo positivo del titolo del meeting, cioè la nuova prospettiva, cercare una nuova prospettiva. Sarò molto veloce, questa non è una minaccia ma una promessa. Questo è un luogo che nel tempo più volte ha avuto una nuova prospettiva, è stato, c'è la sala, il Tempio di Adriano e Bibbia Sabina, è stato financo un ospizio, dogana. Quindi nel tempo si è reinventato, ha trovato nuove prospettive, quindi io spero e vi auguro che oggi anche questo luogo vi possa aiutare in questo senso. Quindi veramente benvenuti e buon lavoro, buona giornata.
Thank you, Mr. Rea. Now, I hope everyone has read the program. We have an intense morning with welcoming remarks as a first thing, followed by opening speech and keynote speeches. I would like to start introducing our invited people for the welcoming remarks, starting with Mr. Patrick Matet, member of the board and interim president of the High Authority for Transparency in Public Life, France, and current president of ENPE. We have also Ms. Alina Mungiu-Pipidi, Professor of Comparative Public Policy in the Department of Political Science at the Luis Guido Carli University. We have Mr. Filippo Patroni Griffi, who is a judge of the Constitutional Court of Italy and former Minister for Public Administration and Simplification. And we have ANAC's President, Mr. Giuseppe Busia. So I would like to start the welcoming remarks inviting Mr. Giuseppe Busia to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's authorities representative of European, national and international organization, dear colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming in Rome, thank you for coming here. I'm very glad to welcome you today here to discuss the new perspective, as has been said, of corruption prevention in Europe. It is an important conference, which is also an annual meeting of the European Network of Public Ethics. It is precisely to ENPE Presidency and Secretary that I would like first to express my most heartfelt thanks for having contributed with such commitment and conviction to the organization of this event, which will take place today in this fantastic temple of all Vibia, Sabinian and Hadrian. And let me address my sincere thanks to the Chamber of Commerce of Rome for making this magnificent hall for our meeting in such evocative location. And I hope some of you enjoyed yesterday the night visit on the ancient Roman Forum, and who missed, unfortunately, disappointment. Today will be also the possibility to participate at the reserved night visit of Capitoline Museum. And I would like to thank everyone here today for being here and to participate, come in Rome and to work together on the preventing corruption and to see and to try to understand which are the new perspectives. And of course, last but not least, I want to thank really all the entire team of ANAC. All the colleagues that are here, they did an extraordinary work. They have done a lot of work to make this event possible and create the condition of, I hope, a fruitful discussion. As we will know, also, and we read also in the explanatory memorandum of the European Commission proposal for anti-corruption directive of last May, currently under negotiation, corruption is highly damaging to society, to our democracy, to economy, and to individuals. Because it undermines the institution on which we depend, jeopardizing their credibility, as well as their ability to deliver public policies and qualities of public services. It also deepens social inequalities, divert resources from productive outcomes and collective well-being, hampers the effective functioning of the single market, and acts as an enabler of organizing crime and hostile foreign interference. Therefore, successfully preventing and fighting against corruption is essential both to safeguard European value and the effectiveness of EU policies, and also to maintaining the rule of law and the trust in those who govern and public institutions. Such a need must be felt even more urgently today, when corruption has become widespread and transnational phenomenon that affect all societies and economies. So, transnational must be the effort to fight and eradicate, and the EU-level action is strategic. It is expected to be more effective and efficient to bring a tangible added value compared to action by the Member State individually, especially in the term of prevention. For this reason, since in expansion, the ENPE, our network, has set itself the objective of developing a unique expertise in order to become a privileged interlocutor of European institutions on issues of integrity, transparency, and public ethics. With the same aim of integrating and coordinating to the maximum degree anti-corruption strategies, the network has strongly urged EU institutions to adopt a directive representing an effective progress in combating the phenomenon through legislative approach to preventive measures and the introduction of some shared minimum standard on public integrity. We, therefore, hope that the negotiation will be concluded soon. We know there is the trialogue, there was a position of the Council, there was a position of the Parliament was more open, and we really asked to the European institution to try to find and to adopt a directive. And we know that there will be some resistance in some countries, and we hope that they will be overcome so that all European member states can have more effective and coordinating tools to defend their institution from the danger of crime and bad administration. This is also essential to strengthen our democracy, which are now experiencing an alarming crisis of participation. We also believe that this conference will be a valuable opportunity for representatives of different institutions and countries to discuss future perspectives of corruption prevention within the framework of proposed directive and beyond. And I want to thank all the persons that came here and will participate on the debate. And we believe that ENPE, our network, which brings together authorities from European member states active in matters of public integrity, can really make a difference in this sense, indicating a fruitful path also for governments and political institutions. And I want to thank, of course, the colleagues that are here, that came in Rome to participate, because our network, I want to say to our host, is a strong network that is growing and want to be present in the European Forum. Our shared mission involves not only maintaining the rule of law and fighting corruption, but also through effective corruption strategies, promoting good governance and transparency, spreading the culture of integrity, strengthening trust in public decision makers, and fostering democratic participation. Our commitment to act together at the highest level is a prerequisite for achieving our common goals, and that to making our community healthier and more equitable. Today, we are in an historic moment in Europe for corruption prevention. We have not to lose this unique occasion and strengthen our cooperation and common effort to achieve our institutional objective, to reinforce our institution, and to contribute to well-being of our societies and the growing of our democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bouzia. I would like to invite Mr. Matte to the floor. Thank you so much.
Monsieur le Président de l'Autorité nationale anticorruption, cher Giuseppe Bouzia, Monsieur le Ministre, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, Madame la médiatrice européenne, Madame la députée européenne, Madame la directrice de la gouvernance publique, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis très heureux d'ouvrir cette conférence sur la prévention de la corruption en Europe. Une nouvelle perspective. En plus, je suis d'autant plus heureux de le faire dans ce lieu chargé d'histoire que constitue le temple d'Adrien à Rome. Je tiens à remercier chaleureusement le président Giuseppe Bouzia pour son accueil, ainsi que les membres de l'autorité nationale anticorruption italienne qui œuvrent depuis plusieurs mois à l'organisation de cette conférence. Je tiens également à remercier vivement M. Pietro Abate, secrétaire général de la Chambre de commerce, de nous permettre d'être réunis aujourd'hui dans ce cadre prestigieux. À titre plus personnel, je me réjouis en tant que magistrat et désormais président par intérim de la Haute Autorité pour la transparence de la vie publique de contribuer à vos discussions. Nous sommes réunis ce matin afin d'évoquer la prévention de la corruption en Europe. Comme nouvelle perspective de la lutte contre la corruption, la prévention de la corruption est devenue une préoccupation centrale de nos démocraties européennes. Elle est la garante de la stabilité de nos institutions et de la confiance de nos citoyens en celles-ci. Prévenir la corruption, c'est assurer le respect de l'état de droit, en garantissant que les responsables publics auront à rendre des comptes. Le rapport sur l'état de droit qui a été publié par la Commission européenne en juillet 2024 inclut de nombreuses recommandations en ce sens et à cet égard, ce rapport met en avant la nécessité pour les États membres de renforcer leur cadre préventif en matière de lutte contre la corruption, notamment en envisageant ou en prenant des mesures supplémentaires pour encadrer le lobbying, les conflits d'intérêts et les déclarations de patrimoine. L'Union européenne a franchi une étape importante dans cette lutte avec la présentation du paquet anticorruption le 3 mai 2023. La proposition de directive anticorruption contient, comme vous le savez, un volet préventif et offre une occasion clé d'améliorer nos normes d'intégrité. L'inclusion du volet préventif au sein de cette directive a été portée par notre réseau, le réseau européen d'éthique publique auprès des institutions européennes, affirmant ainsi la nécessité d'une approche législative pour garantir l'entière efficacité des mesures préventives. L'approche préventive de la lutte contre la corruption constitue le pendant indissociable d'une approche répressive. Pour lutter efficacement contre la corruption, nous devons agir en amont en construisant des institutions fortes, transparentes et résilientes. La création et la mise en place d'un organe éthique européen renforce pour les institutions européennes cet aspect préventif de la lutte contre la corruption. La première réunion technique de cet organe s'est tenue le 4 octobre dernier. Elle ouvre un nouveau chapitre dans la construction d'une véritable culture de l'intégrité harmonisée entre les institutions européennes. Au niveau national maintenant, le renforcement de l'indépendance, des pouvoirs et des moyens des autorités de promotion de l'intégrité publique constitue un enjeu majeur de crédibilité de l'action publique et de la confiance des citoyens dans leurs institutions. L'approche préventive de la lutte contre la corruption repose sur des autorités compétentes qui peuvent exercer leur mission de contrôle de manière effective et autonome. À ce titre, et comme le prévoit la prévention de directives anticorruption, il est important que les États membres prennent des mesures de prévention des conflits d'intérêts, que les États membres prévoient des règles en matière de déclaration des avoirs des responsables publics pour s'assurer de l'absence d'enrichissement personnel au cours de leur mandat ou de leur fonction. Il est important également que ces États membres mènent des actions de sensibilisation et d'accompagnement des responsables publics. À cela s'ajoute le contrôle des mobilités professionnelles depuis ou vers le secteur privé, les revolving doors, pour garantir le bon fonctionnement et la neutralité de l'administration. Ainsi, lors de notre première réunion plénière à Zagreb, en novembre 2022, le réseau européen d'éthique publique s'était réuni autour du thème des mobilités entre secteurs public et privé. Puis en octobre 2023, à Ljubljana, sur les dispositifs en matière de déclaration obligatoire des acteurs publics. À l'issue de cette dernière réunion, nous avons envoyé aux institutions européennes un standard minimum commun aux membres du réseau sur les obligations déclaratives. La présidente de la Commission européenne, Ursula von der Leyen, a ainsi salué la contribution concrète du réseau à ce travail d'harmonisation qui trouve ainsi toute son utilité dans le cadre des négociations de la directive relative à la lutte contre la corruption. Cette année, notre réunion plénière va être l'occasion de partager les différentes pratiques en matière de détection et de gestion des conflits d'intérêts au sein de la sphère publique. Nous avons aussi pour ambition, à l'issue de cette réunion, d'adopter une déclaration soutenant dans leur ensemble les mesures préventives contenues dans la proposition de directive de lutte contre la corruption et encourageant à aller encore plus loin. L'approche préventive de la lutte contre la corruption constitue un axe essentiel de l'intégrité de la vie publique et de la pérennité de nos démocraties, pour laquelle le réseau européen d'éthique publique se mobilise. L'ensemble des acteurs de la lutte contre la corruption semble désormais emprunter cette perspective est favorable à cette approche qui doit s'ancrer sur la scène européenne. Les discussions en trilogue qui auront lieu dans les prochains mois autour de la directive anticorruption seront, nous l'espérons, l'occasion de concrétiser cette mobilisation commune. Je vous remercie donc de votre engagement et de votre présence.
Thank you so much for your speech. We have now Mr. Filippo Patroni Griffi.
Well, good morning, everyone. Please, first of all, allow me to thank you all for having me today. In particular, I would like to thank the President of the Italian Anti-Corruption Authority, Giuseppe Busia. In a different capacity, I witnessed the very birth of the authority when I followed, as a minister, the approval process of Law 190, the so-called Legge Severino. And this law marked the institutionalization of the fight against corruption through the establishment of the Anti-Corruption Authority, which was originally called CIVIT and then ANAC as now. At the time, the fight against corruption in Italy was at a crucial stage. On the one hand, the United Nations Merida Convention ratified by Italy in 2009 had remained unimplemented, absolutely, as well as the relevant OECD guidelines. On the other hand, no national legislation on corruption was in place, although Italy had a high rate of corruption compared to other EU countries. However, I must say that a culture of legality and transparency had spread to various sectors of public administration, with the need to formalize and institutionalize the fight against corruption soon becoming evident. The most important aspect of the 2012 law is to be found, as you know, in the logic of prevention. The underlying assumption is that the fight against corruption cannot be reduced to repressive criminal intervention, but must be pursued through preventive measures, considering the phenomenon from an administrative perspective, which also includes conduct that is not criminally relevant and punishable. At the same time, prevention ensures the transparency of public administration and of its decision-making process, thus combating corruption in a systemic way. The year 2012 thus witnessed a significant change of direction, first and foremost cultural, based on the will to focus the work of public administration on values of integrity and ethics, which translate into being at the service of the common good. The National Anti-Corruption Plan 2022, 10 years later, to 2024, approved by ANAC in January 2023, is perfectly in line with this change of direction. The plan features, among other things, a specific system for monitoring the application of preventive measures and a decisive system for simplifying administrative procedures. This is so because corruption is assumed to be fueled by the obscurity and cumbersomeness of laws. Simplification is therefore a useful remedy to prevent the multiplication of corruption and ensure transparency, according to the principle, quoting our Norberto Bobbio, that democracy must ensure a visible exercise of power. The plan also contains a list, in order of priority, of the sectors where anti-corruption measures must be adopted. In addition to the traditional sector of public contracts, what stands out are the activities involving structural funds, funds from the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, and the fund instrumental in achieving performance goals. Among its many reform objectives, the PNRR provides for anti-corruption and transparency regulations aimed at ensuring adequate protection of legality in order to prevent funds from being directed to illegal or even corrupt activities. The objective of ensuring the transparency of public decision-making processes revolves around the digitalization of procedures, which also have at their core preventive measures intended to avoid unfair practices. The recently enacted Code of Public Contracts provides for a series of digital infrastructure services and platforms with certification and interoperability systems. It's built as an open, that's very important I think, it's an open, uniform and comparable system that guarantees full transparency. In this way, citizens, and not only authorities, are granted easy access to all the public administration activities and all public expenditure. A further novelty concerns the project funded by the National Operation Program Governance and the Institutional Capacity 2014-2020, aimed at developing a new model for measuring the risk of corruption in procurement. The model is based on a set of indicators that assess the level of corruption in different territories. These indicators highlight areas particularly at risk, prompting specific intervention for each area. The preventive model to fight corruption is also part of the very goals of the European Union. In particular, I refer to EU Directive 1937 of 2019 on whistleblowing, which aims to protect people who report breaches of law in the workplace. To implement the directive, Italy adopted a legislative decree, that is, delegated legislation, the legislative decree number 24, year 2023, which grants various forms of protection to employees who report breaches of national or supranational provisions which may undermine the public interest or the integrity of the public administration. The regulation is meant to prevent retaliation that employees may suffer from their managers for reporting breaches. The legislation came into force just over 1 year ago and provides for 3 different channels of reporting breaches. The first one requires the establishment of a dedicated office internal to the workplace or the presence of an external person in charge of receiving reports. The second channel is external to the workplace and is managed by the authority itself. The third channel consists in public disclosure. To ensure the functioning of the reporting system, a number of measures are in place specifically to protect the identity of the whistleblowers. In short, and finally, what emerges from the analysis of these even very recent measures is that the fight against corruption is only possible if several public policies at different levels and multiple factors converge, namely legislative, judicial, and above all, cultural factors. The fight against corruption should not be limited to the prosecution or sentencing stages, important though they are, of course. The fight against corruption should rest upon the continued development of prevention strategies, which should also highlight the transparency of political decision-making processes at all levels, so as to consolidate the promotion of the principle of legality or of rule of law, as you prefer, as a mental and behavioral habit. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much for reminding us all our history and legislative steps in the anti-corruption area. So thank you to all our guests. I would like for Ms. Alina Mungiu-Pipiti now to give her a keynote speech. But first, I would like to acknowledge that we have some guests connected remotely. I don't know if it is possible to see them in the screen or not, and I don't know if they hear me. Here we are. Thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I would like to introduce to you Miss Emily O'Reilly, who is the European Ombudsman. Good morning, Ms. O'Reilly, and thank you for being here. We have Ms. Elsa Pilichowski, who is the Director for Public Governance at the OECD. Thank you. And we have Ms. Ramona Strugario, who is the former EU Parliament rapporteur on the Commission's proposal for a directive on combating corruption. Thank you, all of you. Yes. Alina, would you like to start this series of keynote speeches?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to our hosts, both ANAC and the Chamber of Commerce, which lent us this really wonderful venue, which humbles us. I am an academic studying corruption. I used to be an activist fighting corruption. I led most anti-corruption coalitions in my country, which is Romania, for many years. But I've been a pure academic for the past 20 years. So what I would like to do to you today is to simply show you a little bit the evidence from an academic point of view, because we have by now, we didn't have them 10 years ago, but by now, helped by also EU funding and other generous research funding for academics, we have managed to put together some evidence. So we can really look a little bit at what regulation we have and what regulation really does. I will start the presentation with the help of organizers. It's actually a very brief presentation. Okay. So, should we upgrade the EU regulatory framework in corruption and anti-corruption? I would say that, at first sight when we look, there are some elements clearly in favor. We can argue that there can be made an argument for the need of it, but there are also some warnings to be made. The element in favor are, of course, the need to eliminate the double standards in criminal legislation that we have presently. There are countries in which elected officials abusing their office, sold sanitary equipment and got rich. There are countries when they tried to do this and were prevented, and there were countries when they tried to do this and were investigated and went to jail. Now, we really cannot live in a single common market and in a single political space where you have this difference of treatment. For some officials, their position is enough to get rich of selling masks, and for others, you would go to jail for this. This clearly has to be unified if we are to be serious about a common legal space and the rule of law in the European Union. By the way, one of the countries where nobody was investigated is the country where I lived for the past 15 years, because I was a professor in a Berlin university. So in Germany, flagrantly, members of parliament profited from their position selling masks, and nothing happened to them. No prosecutor ever knocked at their door. In my real country, in Romania, they would be in jail if they do something like this, which shows a little bit that we need to do something. We need to unify this framework. So the second thing is that we have two widely different interpretations of what a public official is legally and what is abuse of office. Right? I have been teaching corruption 15 years to students, and the interpretation in European countries, it's so completely different that it is quite impossible to tell people that at least theoretical standards, at least moral standards are unitary. So we need to make a step towards unifying this, or to simply give up the idea that we have a European legal space and then each country proceeds according to its morals, right? But I am, I have evidence from all over the world, not just the European Union, that in fact the population, the people, the citizenry have a unitary understanding these days of what is corrupt and what is not. And expectations are very high from us to actually apply a tall order. People want us to be inclusive in this definition. People no longer have the mentality that they had 20, 30 years ago. All over the world, we have global corruption barometer run by our colleagues in Transparency International, and you would see that people understand the same by what is ethical and what is not when government is concerned these days. So it is really the end of cultural relativism in corruption and anti-corruption. Expectations are high, and so should be the legal demands. However, what I find, as a scholar, problematic in this attempt is that I find that in fact the preventive part is weak compared to the criminal part in the proposals that we have now. And I'm not surprised, because for many years it has been the attitude of the European Commission that it is the criminal part which matters. And for many years I have been critical of this, because you know, when you have a country like Ukraine, for instance, where the judiciary is the weakest spot in the country, to build an anti-corruption strategy focused on the judiciary, to make what is actually the problem, to make it the solution, is obviously wrong. And this is why we did not succeed in any of the countries of the Western Balkans, and we did not succeed in Ukraine. Right? We are preparing now for the Ukrainian reconstruction. Unless we plan the Ukrainian reconstruction on the preventive side, unless we plan people from the start diverting the funds that we're going to put there, we're going to have another Afghanistan, another Iraq, another Haiti, not because of Ukrainians, because there were no Ukrainians, right, in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Haiti, and they were all very corrupt reconstructions. But because we conceive anti-corruption, by we, I understand the European Commission frequently conceives anti-corruption as allow the act of corruption to happen and then prosecute it in a cycle which will take between 2 and 6 years or 10 years, which is obviously extraordinarily ineffective and wasteful, and that's not the way we should go about it. So I absolutely welcome anything preventive, and on the criminal side, I think just the unification of standards would be a fantastic step ahead if we manage to do it. Now, other warnings that I have should be an independence assessment in everything that we do, right? The way that this entire exercise is conceived is that countries are going to enforce, countries are going to implement, and countries are going to assess themselves. Now, with all due respect towards our member states, that's not how it works. You need to have some objective comparative indicators which an independent entity will assess across all countries in order to understand where this is going, if it will have an impact or not. So, just a little bit to understand why corruption continues to be a problem, despite the fact that this is not the first directive, right? We had several directives on procurement. We had the money laundering directives, the whistleblowing directives, the directives against financial crimes, and name it. You know, I have been a long-time friend with the former member of European Parliament, Monica Macovei, who pushed a lot of these directives. The thing is that, you know, it's not just regulation which changes the world, more or less, and not just European influence is good in terms of increasing constraints on corruption, but one has also to understand that Europeanization itself is something which also creates opportunities for corruption. So it's good to create constraints, but it would be even better, and this is where not only preventive regulation, specific regulation, but a larger array of politics could conceive in reducing opportunities. We have evidence, academic evidence, that EU funds actually significantly increase opportunities for corruption. In particular, in countries where institutions are weaker, having more EU funds increases risks for corruption. I mean, we have a lot of papers, none of them disagrees with this, right? And therefore, we also have to think at this. Poor regulatory quality, excessive regulation, which is something that we associate with the European Union. Also, we have evidence, it is systematically correlated with higher corruption. Okay, so we need to be very parsimonious when regulating. We really need to hit the nail on its head to have the kind of very strong impact regulation, because otherwise it's not that we put more laws and it doesn't matter. No, laws are incentives for perverse behavior. You create a bad regulatory framework, people will abuse it. And that's why evidence is important, having evidence, acting only on the basis of evidence, consulting the patient that you're trying to make well every time, take his symptoms, not just regulate blindly, imagining that we all take an aspirin, tomorrow we're going to wake up and be very high on integrity. Where we are, I mean, again, we have to have a model of change. When you pass a law, you have to understand, like with the medicine, what is the physiological mechanism which would make someone better. What you see here is comprehensive preventive regulation, which is entirely documented by a website of mine, which is called europam.eu, which was created on a big horizon of the European Union, DG WIST. And what you see there is that you can compare regulation of all European countries plus accession countries in public procurement, conflict of interest regulation, freedom of information, party funding, and financial and conflict of interest disclosures. And in the circles that you see, if the lines, so you see first a line which is the European Union average, and then you see the country. So you can compare every country against the European average. How are the points given? Points are according to comprehensiveness. For instance, the more categories have to fill in conflict of interest rules, the more points a country gets. So the deeper and broader legislation you have, the more points you get there. And if the lines are around the circle, come close to the circle, it means that you really reach the 100%. We call this a fulfillment index. You get to the maximum regulation that you could have adopted. If it's very narrow and in the center it's little, you cannot see it, but it has figures on everything. Well, what you see here are two countries, right? And of one of two countries, one has really nearly a maximum of regulation, and this country is Hungary, and the other one has a minimum of regulation, and this country is Finland. Now, if you really check what happens in terms of if you have direct indicators of corruption, Hungary, of course, is nearly a capture state. I'm sorry, because they have the presidency of the EU, and Finland is the least corrupt state in the European Union. So there is no direct and automatic connection between this. There is only one thing that Finland does better than Hungary, which is transparency. Finland publishes everybody's income and how much they pay tax every year, not just for public officials, for the entire society. And in such a society in which everybody watches everybody, you do not need all this regulation, right? Because things are prevented. So regulation doesn't do it so much, you know. Hungary asked by the European Commission, adopted a new anti-corruption agency, did this and did that, and they'll do everything we ask them, because anyway this will not translate into anything, okay? It will just remain on paper. So we have to be aware of the limits of regulation. See here, for instance, this comes from the European Commission Single Market Public Procurement Scoreboard, right? And what is interesting is that this is the interval in which the directives of procurement got adopted and implemented everywhere. All the countries transposed them into legislation, right? And if you see this graph, you will see that the red year is the earliest and the blue year is the most recent. And except two countries, which are Portugal and the Czech Republic, which evolved positively, what you see here is that actually after adopting the procurement regulations, in fact, this main risk indicator that you see in the graph, which is called single bidding, which are tenders which are apparently competitive, but in fact only one bidder steps forward, and this is 90% due to corruption, in fact degraded all over the European continent. In fact, in 10 years since I'm looking at this, the European average doubled, because it used to be around 12% and now it's a bit over 20 on the recent data. In other words, 1 of 5 tenders, and now it's 1 of 4, are just not competitive, right? And why did this happen? Well, we can blame the pandemics, we can blame a number of things which led to shortcut of regulations, but the point is that this happens in the years when we adopted this directive and we should have implemented it. So we should see the opposite trend. What we see in Portugal, we should see everywhere else, but we don't. We see the opposite. So again, we have to account for other things than just legislation. Legislation doesn't operate in a vacuum. We have to control for the other conditions, or we adopt regulation. It may be very good regulation on paper, but we adopt it for nothing. Big variation which justifies the unification of regulation. What you see here, the darker the shade, the better regulation you have. The better meaning more regulation, but it is the better, right? So you see here that Slovenia, I think it is on top, has best conflict of interest regulation in Europe because it is the darkest, and the other countries similarly, right? You also see on public procurement. In public procurement, you can see very clearly that countries with corruption problems actually have tougher regulation presently, like mine. We have to adopt tougher regulation because we have more problem on procurement. I do not argue that in public procurement everyone has to have similar regulation. You know, regulation has to be proportional to the policy problem that a country has. But anyway, very large variation, and we are in a common market, you know. Companies can shop, can look for loopholes and something. We have to be aware of these differences. Financial disclosure framework, wide variation, and you know very well that some countries nearly don't have it or have very little of it and transparent of it. We have France and Portugal from Western Europe, and for the rest it's mostly an East European affair. Why? Because we had problems with corruption, and therefore we forced public officials to really publish online very comprehensive disclosures, and believe me, this helped quite a lot in the fight against corruption, because once they're online, you can rely on spontaneous whistleblower. You can rely, when I was in my early years, a director of Romanian television, I put the house of the Secret Service head on TV because he had this luxurious house. And I put this, let's say, on Tuesday, don't ask me how I got it, and on Wednesday I received a call from a nurse in provincial Romania, and she said, I have here a patient who lives next of a second house of the head of Secret Service, and who told me to call you, we're going to send you a picture of this second house. You know, once something is public, everyone becomes a whistleblower. If you have financial disclosures and they're not public, they're really not helpful, and this pertains to the entire discussion of European Parliament on what they should disclose and what they should not disclose. Finally, you see here, until now, I only showed you de jure, which means regulation, right? You've seen maps of regulation in which who has more regulation get better grades or gets darker on the map. What you see here is de facto, what countries should publish in order to enable monitoring by the entire society, and of course making also the law enforcement authorities. If you have register of commerce, if your land cadastre is online, if your financial disclosures are up there, if your public expenditures are up there and in a form which can be followed, right, with a tracker, not just once per year, a PDF showing how much money you spend. This is aggregated in another color convention, so if you're red, you're bad. If you're darker green, you're quite good. And again, you see quite a considerable variation in Europe, and all this is a program. All this is a program. You go to this web page, you click there, you will go directly into the website in any of these countries, and you would see what countries miss and what countries have. Right? Of course, you cannot give a law to tell all the countries to do this. They will have to do it, and we have to create, you know, incentives for countries to compete a little bit more in transparency. Now, this, what I showed you, is what we know, but there are quite a lot of things that we don't know, but we are working on them to try to support efforts like the directive and its implementation. And here, with my colleagues from Transparency International here and other colleagues, over the next 4 years, we are trying to complete this and to come with a full model under what circumstances de jure translates successfully into de facto. In other words, to have the enabling circumstances of regulation, what makes regulation work, and how can we bridge this implementation gap that we so frequently see in Europe. We are the land in the world with the best regulation, but it's not that our best regulation is more effective than anywhere else. It's not that it always translates into results. And we as scientists are going to try to provide the documentation to help this effort that we fully support and endorse. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Very interesting. I would like to invite Ms. Emily O'Reilly to give her speech. Are we still connected? Hope so. Hello? Yes, we can hear you. Ah, yes, and we can see you now also. Thank you.
And I'm conscious of the challenges faced by the organisers in keeping this to time, so I'll speak as quickly as I can, and I hope you can follow. So my thanks to the Italian Anti-Corruption Authority and the European Network for Public Ethics for the invitation to speak to you today. The issue of public ethics and the integrity of high-level officials is very relevant and a timely theme from an EU perspective. The institutions in Brussels and Strasbourg are currently engaged in the process for the appointment of new commissioners, a process that includes the European Parliament vetting of proposed commissioners for potential conflicts of interest. We cannot say at this point how the vetting will go or whether some of those designated for the post by member states will be rejected, but the process itself can reveal a lot about how ethics in public life are viewed across the Union. My objective as European Ombudsman is to ensure that citizens are served by an efficient and accountable European administration, primarily through complaint-based investigations into possible maladministration by the main EU legislative institutions, the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, but also by the European Central Bank, the European Investment Bank, and around 40 regulatory agencies. I perform my duties independently and take my own decisions about opening investigations. The main source of these investigations is citizen, civil society and business complaints, but I also use my right to act on my own initiative in order to tackle systemic problems within the Union's institutions. These institutions are, on the whole, staffed by a well-qualified, well-paid, independent-minded civil service who have the interests of the European public at heart. The quality and integrity of these public servants is something that we celebrate every 2 years with an award ceremony for good European administration. In 2022, for example, we awarded the overall prize to officials who developed guidelines for the documentation of human rights abuses in Ukraine and elsewhere. So while classical forms of bribery in the European administration are not unknown, they are generally rare. That is why the Qatargate revelations that emerged nearly 2 years ago in the European Parliament were so shocking. The graphic pictures of large sums of cash tucked into suitcases allegedly offered by foreign governments in return for votes and for positive speeches were shocking. But while events of this apparent scale are, thankfully, rare, it would be misleading to paint a completely positive picture of the integrity of EU institutions. If we think of corruption as a kind of poison in the body politic, we see that, like poisons, there are many different types of corruption. Some are fast-acting, while some build up in the body for months and even years before becoming fatal. So that is why I've placed a lot of emphasis in my inquiries on protecting the European public interest from those more insidious, more subtle forms of corruption. One example is the conflicts of interest created by the revolving door between the private and public sector, where former politicians and senior officials are hired by firms to lobby their former colleagues or to provide insider confidential information. This form of soft corruption is all the more insidious for being legal, and the impact on the public's faith in democracy is corrosive. A 2022 OECD survey of mature democracies found that nearly half of respondents believed that an elected or appointed official would accept a well-paid job in the private sector in exchange for a political favour. If nearly half of the electorate, rightly or wrongly, believe that politicians are treating meetings with industry chiefs that they are regulating as a kind of job interview, this partly explains the widespread cynicism and dissatisfaction with our democratic systems. My office has therefore launched inquiries into the systemic issues around this area, as well as individual revolving doors cases relating to the European Investment Bank, the European Banking Authority, the European Defence Agency, the European Commission, among others. As a result, there has been some progress in the EU institutions on this issue, with longer cooling off periods, tighter restrictions on how much lobbying officials and commissioners can do after their term of office has ended, and greater transparency around the movements of senior officials in the private sector. Unfortunately, this does not prevent moves by senior officials that raise profound concerns about potential conflicts of interest. I recently asked the Commission to answer questions about the move by a former senior official of the Commission's competition department to a major US antitrust law firm. It seems that even where the potential conflicts of interest are greatest, as in this case, there is a reluctance to prevent officials from taking up these roles, an approach that we have asked the Commission to reconsider, but so far without too much success. It has moved in recent months to request former officials to reference restrictions that have been placed upon them in any public statements about their new private sector role. However, it is usually the private company itself and not the former official who does the publicity. And the typical press release usually speaks with great excitement about the role played by the former official in the development of important sectoral regulation while at the Commission. The European Parliament has agreed to a 6-month cooling off period for former MEPs as part of the package of reforms agreed after the Qatargate scandal. This is the first time that MEPs will be subject to any kind of restriction, although there are concerns that it is too short a period to be in any way meaningful. The Parliament also improved the transparency of meetings between MEPs and lobbyists, and for the first time required MEPs to file detailed declarations of assets upon taking up their mandate, although these will not be disclosed to the public. We need to reflect deeply and imaginatively on how the various forms of corruption undermine our economies and our democracies. This more comprehensive view of how to defend public institutions was present in the Commission's anti-corruption package in May of this year. If our democracies are under attack, as European Parliament President Metsola declared after Qatargate, then the first line of defence must be public officials who embody the values of integrity and inclusive decision-making in their daily work. The most effective defence is public institutions that display a high degree of transparency and accountability. Our experience at EU level reveals a lot. If the allegations made public are true, the influence buying revealed in Qatargate was enabled by poorly implemented lobby and transparency rules, non-existent revolving doors regulation, and the absence of rules for the disclosure of assets. By reforming to some extent each of these elements, the Parliament has understood that these are the basis of an anti-corruption regime. The EU's new interinstitutional ethics body marks another important step in protecting the administration from corruption and regaining some of the citizen trust lost in the Qatargate scandal. Established this year, it is designed to harmonise ethics rules across the EU institutions, including conflicts of interest and revolving doors rules. It will include representatives from each participating institution, as well as 5 independent observers. Most of the institutions have selected their representatives. Our hope is that the new body will help in raising ethics standards across the entire administration. Its existence may also compel the EU institutions to examine their own ethics regimes, compare them with one another, and therefore exert peer pressure. But important concerns remain, such as whether the self-regulation model that remains largely intact can effectively ensure compliance with strong ethical standards in the long run. We need to have a pan-European conversation about ethical standards and new and emerging forms of corruption, because corruption is not a static legal concept. In the future, the provision of deliberately misleading or false information to public officials in order to delay or dilute climate change legislation, for example, may also be considered a form of corruption. At the very least, a dynamic, open and inclusive conversation around these issues will encourage us to update our thinking. This is not just a theoretical discussion, but is an urgent practical matter. As I mentioned earlier, the European Parliament is currently trying to decide whether potential or even perceived conflicts of interest are grave enough to warrant the rejection of the candidacy of individual commissioners. These are difficult judgments to make, scrupulously and impartially at the best of times, when all the participants are clear about what the rules are and how the game should be played. But in a body that struggles to find common ground among 27 very different political and legal cultures, this can be almost impossible. As the Council of Europe's Greco has pointed out, in some member states there is still no clear and uniform definition of conflict of interest and no post-employment restrictions on ministers and secretaries of state. The Council is another arena at EU level where we struggle to find a uniform definition and application of conflict of interest rules. It has effectively exempted itself from the interinstitutional ethics body, insisting that only national rules should apply to decisions it takes as an institution. As such, only the President of the Council and the High Representative for Foreign Policy will come within the scope of the new body. Hypothetically, two ministers involved in the same decision about the EU's sanction or foreign trade policies could be subject to very different revolving doors regulations, one forbidden and one permitted to join, say, for example, a Chinese state-owned company. And I leave it to you to decide whether this is either fair or in the public interest. The EU is a highly integrated political and economic body. As we saw with the euro, design flaws in one country can quickly have a major impact on others. This is as true of our integrity frameworks as it is of our monetary and fiscal policies. So therefore, it is incumbent on institutions concerned with public ethics to make sure that our policymakers at national and EU level have a shared understanding of what it means to protect the integrity of their decision-making from external influence. If we can succeed, we will have done EU citizens a very great service. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us. I would like now to give the floor to Ms. Elsa Pilichowski.
Good morning. Can you hear me well?
Hello?
Ah.
Yes.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Great, fantastic. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really very happy to join you today and would like to thank the National Anti-Corruption Authority of Italy for organizing this very important event at a very timely moment. It's been said already this morning, no country is immune to corruption, and we all know here that corruption adversely affects prosperity and democracy, aggravates inequality and hampers economic growth, and it is absolutely detrimental to public trust. And if you allow me, I will start with this, as our conversations are very, very timely for that. According to the 2023 OECD survey on the drivers of public trust in public institutions, 44% of respondents on average in the 30 countries where we have run the survey have low or no trust in their national government, when 39% have high or moderately high trust. So for the first time in a long time, we have a higher number of people who have low or no trust in public institutions than those who have high or moderately high trust. And all our data show that it's the processes that underpin democratic governance, underpin how policymakers are making the decisions that are at stake, which we can improve, and where we can have an impact on higher trust. This includes, first and foremost, integrity issues, and also the fact that the decisions would be taken in favor of the public interest and not in favor of some specific private interest. Checks and balances, accountability, hearing citizens' voices rather than private sector interests are all core drivers of public trust now in OECD countries. At the same time, what we're seeing is that almost half, and the Ombudsman mentioned some of the indicators that we have, but almost half believe today, half of respondents believe that a high-level political official would not refuse a well-paid private sector job in exchange for political favor. And less than 1 in 3 find it likely that a government would refuse a corporation's demand if it went against the public interest. So today we have much higher citizens' expectations, and the lack of integrity is a significant impediment to fostering public trust. So combating corruption and fostering public integrity are really key to building citizens' trust today in government, in public institutions, and standards expected from our citizens are also evolving at much higher levels than in the past. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, but there are also emerging challenges from the green and digital transitions, including with the rise of artificial intelligence and also increasing foreign interference that increase the risk of corruption in OECD countries and beyond. Nevertheless, so in all this landscape, transparent processes, robust frameworks, well-implemented policies are paramount for governments to demonstrate that they are making decisions which are in citizens' best interest, free from undue influence. As I mentioned earlier, this comes out clearly as the main driver of public trust in public institutions today. So the OECD is therefore very committed to helping governments develop the tools and strategies to combat corruption, promote the integrity, which underpins transparent, accountable and democratic societies, and help build trust in public institutions. We have standards at the OECD, legal standards such as the OECD recommendation on public integrity, the recommendation on transparency and integrity in lobbying and influence, which was updated last year to reflect the evolving landscape, the new challenges that are coming up, and the environment in which malign actors are now operating. We also have developed the public integrity indicators, which provide a framework for countries to measure and enhance the performance of their anti-corruption standards, evaluating multiple dimensions of public integrity, including national strategies, conflicts of interest, lobbying, political financing, parliamentary scrutiny, legal stability, and corruption risk management. One of the big conclusions from this year is that while countries are doing well in terms of meeting OECD integrity criteria for integrity regulations, implementation needs to be improved. For example, I can give you some numbers. 76% of our countries meet OECD criteria on conflict of interest, but only 40% in practice. Regarding corruption risk management and audit, 67% of our countries meet OECD regulation criteria, but only 33% in practice. So this implementation gap absolutely needs to be filled in the future. Our work in this area of integrity and anti-corruption is very well aligned with European priorities, and also currently we have 60 countries worldwide, including, of course, many EU members that have engaged in this work, in the indicators, and including all of the 10 founding members of the European Network for Public Ethics. Let me just say a few words in conclusion. Multilateralism and international cooperation are really imperative in our efforts to prevent corruption. And by working together in fora such as this today, we recognize also that a united approach is far more effective than individual states acting in isolation. To raise integrity levels globally, EU and OECD members need to set the bar, and they need to set the bar higher than in the past, because citizens' expectations have changed. Through open dialogue, sharing best practices and evidence-informed policymaking, governments have great potential to reinforce public trust by demonstrating to their citizens that they are working for them. We are very much looking forward to discussing these themes with all of you in the upcoming meetings that we have. And with that, we wish you an excellent day today and a good day of discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Now we are a bit late. Ramona, are you there? Hi, Ramona. Can I ask you to stay within the 10 minutes, please?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm doing my best. Thank you very much, distinguished organizers and guests, dear colleagues. I'm honored by the invitation, and I would like to thank you for this great opportunity to take part in this conference, particularly because I believe that now more than ever, countering corruption and organized crime should be absolute priorities for the upcoming years, both for our member states and for the EU institutions, but also for international bodies and organizations, for the civil society, for activists, for journalists, for whistleblowers, for each and every one of us. Why? Let us look around. The pandemics and the ongoing war have lowered our standards and monitoring, while criminal networks and perpetrators develop faster and better means to act. Corruption is the most important enabler of organized crime. We have seen in the past years how corruption kills. It happened in my own country, Romania. It deeply hurts innocent people. It drags large communities into poverty and sufferance. It kills journalists. It prevents countries from developing and growing in order to become healthy economies and democracies. It deteriorates the rule of law and drastically diminishes trust of citizens in public institutions and bodies. It is a ruthless beast. Now let us look at some figures which indicate how our citizens feel about what we do to counter corruption. According to the Eurobarometer poll from July 2023, 70% of Europeans consider corruption to be widespread in their country, while the majority of them are very pessimistic about national efforts to counter corruption. Only 35% of them consider that measures against corruption are applied impartially, and only 30% of them believe that the national government's efforts to counter corruption are effective. Then we have a 2023 study by the European Parliament Research Service, which says that the estimated total cost of corruption risk in public procurement alone in the EU 27 between 2016 and 2021 was 29.6 billion euros. The total cost of corruption risk in contracts involving EU funds in the same period amounted to 4.3 billion euros. And then we know for a fact from other quantitative assessments that targeted EU action to tackle corruption risks in areas such as public procurement, combined with a solid regulatory environment and effective law enforcement, could generate up to 58.5 billion per year by 2032. So we're not losing money, but we recover this money and we keep them in the citizens' pockets. And yet we did not have so far a comprehensive EU anti-corruption framework. It covered provisions relating to bribery in the private sector, as well as the rules established by the PIF Convention and the Convention on the Fight Against Corruption involving officials of the European communities, and by a few instruments addressing corruption only indirectly. With the EU being a party of international conventions, this raised questions, I would say significant ones, concerning the fulfillment of legal obligations resulting from these conventions, in particular as regards the criminalization of certain activities and the prevention of corruption. The European Parliament also called repeatedly for a strong anti-corruption framework for the Union. We stated clearly that corruption represents a major threat to EU security, and we underlined the crucial role on preventing corruption within the whole anti-corruption framework. Just to give you some examples, we set up the Special Committee on Organized Crime, Corruption and Money Laundering, and we made numerous recommendations endorsed by the whole House. Then in 2021, the Parliament adopted a resolution on the evaluation of preventive measures for avoiding corruption, irregular spending and misuse of EU and national funds in emergency fund and crisis-related spending areas. And then in 2022, we asked for harmonization of definitions of corruption offenses, and we demanded the Commission to put forward a proposal for an EU anti-corruption directive. Then finally, on May 3rd, 2023, no less than 3 of the Commission Vice Presidents, as well as the Commissioner for Home Affairs, presented the new legislative package, which includes the proposal of a dedicated anti-corruption directive, a joint communication on the fight against corruption, and new sanctions regime to target acts of corruption worldwide. And I had the honor to be the rapporteur of the European Parliament for this directive. In the explanatory statement of the proposal, what the Commission clearly states is that the United Nations Convention Against Corruption is the most comprehensive international legal instrument in this field, combining a wide range of measures to prevent and fight corruption. And that the aim of this legislative proposal is to update the EU legislative framework by incorporating international standards binding on the EU, such as those in UNCAC. Also, the Commission states that apart from proposing harmonization in line with the provisions of UNCAC, it is committing to take a more ambitious approach and going beyond international obligations in those areas where action has proven benefits in terms of cross-border cooperation. And I'd like to say that we have a good proposal from the Commission. I think it's ambitious. I think it modernizes the existing EU anti-corruption legal framework. I think it does address the preventative dimension of corruption in a rather limited way, justified by the Commission with the choice of the legal basis, which of course presupposes a minimal harmonization of the criminal offenses at EU level. But nevertheless, we do have Article 3 imposing member states clear obligations to adopt proper instruments to prevent corruption. We have Article 4, where member states must have specialized bodies in place in order to prevent and fight corruption. And then, of course, we have the alignment with the sanctions included in the PIV directive, which I think is another important component. We saluted, and the European Parliament saluted, the proposal of the Commission. At the same time, we did strongly believe, and you will see it in the position adopted by the Parliament, that a more ambitious approach is needed. What we did briefly, we extended the definition of national official to include any other person assigned or exercising a public service function and any person entrusted with tasks of public interest or in charge of a public service. We included EU decision makers, such as the President of the European Council, commissioners and members of the European Parliament in the category of high officials. We are more specific than the Commission proposal regarding sanctions for natural persons, and we differentiate between offenses. We set the minimum level of maximum penalties at 3, 6, or 7 years, while the Commission proposes 5 years for all offenses under the directive. We introduce new categories of offenses. We have more detailed rules on conflict of interest, lobbying, and revolving doors. We require the member states to adopt and periodically review national strategies on preventing and combating corruption, developed in consultation with civil society and stakeholders, and I would like to underline that this is a very important point for us. We call on a platform on prevention and repression of corruption composed of representatives from specialized bodies and the EU anti-corruption coordinator to assist the Commission in promoting the consistent application of the directive, and not only, also to improve coordination and coherence of the efforts of the member states. We asked the Commission to produce a yearly EU anti-corruption report. We place significant emphasis on the rights of the victims, and whereas the Commission only briefly references residency by investment schemes in one of the recitals of the proposal, we introduce and call for effective measures to ban both residency by investment and citizenship by investment schemes. And I think that this approach was a hard fight to fight, including with my colleagues, including with the House. We've seen positions of various political groups which were very supportive, but we've seen some resistance as well. We moved very fast. And we've then, after we adopted our position, waited for the Council General approach. And we waited, and we waited. And finally, in June, we had the general approach of the Council. And it says, very briefly, and I must say that it's concerning for me, that we have lower penalties and shorter limitation periods. No additional corruption offenses, and like I said, the European Parliament included these corruption offenses in its report. We have a reduced scope regarding criminal offenses covered. We have no reference to the offenses of illicit political financing. We have no criminalization of abuse of function. We have lower penalties and drastically shorter limitations periods. No binding rules and clear rules for lifting immunities and privileges. And last but not least, no clear obligations for member states and EU institutions regarding corruption prevention, which is, again, a very, very important chapter for the European Parliament. And I must say that this is disappointing, and I think this is also a dangerous signal to send to everyone everywhere, outside of Europe as well as in Europe. And I think that the fact that during such times we lower the level of ambition in the fight against corruption could be a predictor of our behavior as a union in the future, and also of our commitment in reality to fight and counter corruption. If you remember, in its speech, the President von der Leyen in 2022, in its speech on the State of the Union, was mentioning the Union's very high ambition to eradicate corruption. And I think that if the Council keeps its position as expressed in the general approach, we risk to barely scratch it and to barely scratch upon its surface, or to leave it undisturbed. And it's not about trends. It's not about whether fight against corruption is popular or not. It's about the fact that it deeply hurts democracies, societies, economies. And we need to be united in countering corruption. And I fully agree that regulation is not by far enough. It's an important component of it. But we need the support of the member states themselves in this fight, and applying and enforcing regulation in each and every country, along with the efforts that the Union and the institutions do. And I hope to keep this level of ambition further on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And see you later in half an hour. We'll see you later on for our panel discussion. Thank you so much. So coffee break time. Fortunately, we move to the other side of the temple. Thanks. Good afternoon, almost everyone. I just wanted to suggest something, since many of you said that it was not clear and it was difficult to hear some of the intervention from remote, especially. I would like you to try with the headphones on, even if you don't need them for translation. I think it's much better. Unfortunately, they are. Okay. Thank you. Now, it's time for our panel discussion. Our panel discussion focuses directly on the directive, and we want to check, debate honestly and openly what is that the directive offers us in terms of more tools in the fight against corruption. What is it that we don't like about the directive? What is that we like about it? We have our guests are Miss Alina Muccio-Pipiti again. We thank her for staying with us the whole morning. We have Ramona Strugario connected remotely. Ramona, thank you again for being here. We have here with us Mr. Nicola Allocca, who is Risk, Business Integrity, Resilience and Quality Director at Autostrade per l'Italia, and also Chair of the Business at OECD Anti-Corruption Committee. We have Mr. Jorge Valladares, who is a Political Integrity Policy Lead at Transparency International, and Annex President Giuseppe Lucia. So the panel will work this way. I will ask each panelist a question and give them from 5 to 10 minutes to respond, to reply. After this, we'll have 20 minutes of questions and answers from the panel. So you can ask questions after the panel ends its works. So I would like to start with Ramona, also because I think you have time constraints, Ramona, is that correct? Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, thank you, Ramona. My question is more or less this proposed directive, and when we speak about the proposed directive at this moment, we speak about the 3 versions that we have, right? But taking the European Parliament, let's say, proposal as the focus of our discussion. Now, this proposal, compared to the UCAC, the UCAC tool, what is the difference in terms of more effective tools against corruption? And we are talking about the preventive aspect of corruption here, and only the preventive side of corruption, right? So my question is, how is this going to help the fight against corruption? And then if you have time, I would like you to tell us a bit more about the proposal of the EU ethics body that has accompanied the proposed directive. Is that all right? Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, I
Okay.
hear you. I was quite concentrated to hear because there's a very strong echo, but straight to the substance. Let me
Wait.
take you through the proposal of the Commission.
Ramona, sorry to interrupt. Ramona,
Proposal.
we cannot hear you at all. Need to do
Can
something.
you hear me?
Buenas.
My microphone is open.
Much
and
better.
I can hear you well. Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay. So, straight to the substance and to your question, I will try to take you very quickly through the proposal of the Commission, a comparison with the UNCAC provisions and what the Parliament did as a matter of fact. We do have in Article 1 of the actions in the area of corruption, as well as measures to better prevent and fight corruption. And then we have Article 3 of the directive that lists some measures that member states should take in order to prevent corruption. And I will quote them now. Raising public awareness, ensuring the highest degree of transparency and accountability in public administration and public decision-making, ensuring open access to information of public interest, effective rules for the disclosure and management of conflicts of interest in the public sector, effective rules for the disclosure and verification of assets of public officials, and rules regulating the interaction between the private and the public sector. This is very good. It's a good start. But then, if we look at the UNCAC proposals, we know for sure, and I think that for the Parliament was a very, very important point, that they require action to also ensure merit-based recruitment and promotion in the public sector, transparency of political financing, codes of conduct for all public officials, accountable and transparent management of public finances, a whole set of rules concerning prevention of corruption in the private sector, then general promotion of active participation of civil society in the prevention and the fight against corruption. All of these have also been like standard practice for anti-corruption and governance initiatives in EU member states for years now. And these are basically admitted standards in the proposal. They are at the same time standards that have been adopted by a large majority of countries in the world, some of the poorest countries as well, and I think it would be extremely regrettable, and we thought at the level of the Parliament it would be extremely regrettable if EU member states, all member states, would not take these standards and turn them into mandatory standards for the Union. The signal that we would send would be a very questionable one in terms of commitment for the fight against corruption, and it would, of course, also undermine the moral authority of the Union when it seeks to encourage this anti-corruption effort. So what we did, and what the Parliament did, is that it took all of these standards and put them into our legislative proposal. Everything is there, and I will give you examples in a second with codes from the proposal, because the negotiations to include all of it and to turn it into mandatory practice and to enforce the shell clause of the Commission and add to it quite consistently, this has been a very serious effort of the Parliament in preparation for the trials with the Council. But before giving you some examples, I would like to also mention a very interesting piece of information. In 2023, the Justice Scoreboard, the EU Justice Scoreboard, is for the first time presenting data on the bodies specialized in the prevention of corruption in the EU member states. Basically, they're giving an overview of the type of powers that such bodies have, their rules, the rules of appointment, and so on. Most member states have one or more bodies that play a role in the prevention of corruption. And this is excellent news for us. There were only 9 member states which did not report on the existence of such specialized preventive bodies, but they do have authorities that, apart from their other tasks, also deal with the prevention of corruption. And then, apart from the powers of these specialized bodies presented in that report, there are other national authorities that may have other powers in the field of prevention, like mentioned. So these are basically, this is excellent news for us. Then the provision of the directive would be more than welcome and appropriate, because we do have a pretty evolved existing infrastructure to support anti-corruption and prevention measures and the idea of bodies and entities dedicated to that in the Union. So, specifically, Chapter 2 of UNCAC, where you have some mandatory and some non-mandatory provisions, is, I would say, incorporated in the proposal of the European Parliament, where we say as follows, and I will literally quote from Article 3, because I think it's important to see that that basically chapter 2 of UNCAC is reflected with shell clauses in our proposal. We mentioned that that member states, as well as institutions, bodies, offices, and agencies of the Union, shall take measures to ensure the highest degree of integrity, transparency, and accountability through merit-based recruitment and promotion. We mentioned the anti-corruption strategies and action plan drafted with the participation of competent authorities, but also with the involvement of civil society. We mentioned sanctions for failure to report substantial assets or interests, code of conduct for public officials, minimum required information to be publicly disclosed in regards to the interaction between public officials and persons or private entities carrying interest of representation, public legislative footprint, disclosure of corporate membership and registration in a transparency register. Then transparency in the funding of candidatures for elected public officials and political parties, annual reporting mechanisms, effective rules for the reporting, audit, and disclosure of political party finance. Institutions, bodies, offices, and agencies of the Union have to put in place comprehensive and up-to-date measures to prevent corruption of Union officials. Again, that was something that met quite a lot of resistance in the House, but we managed to introduce it. Then member states shall take measures, so that's mandatory, to create a strong public service culture based on integrity, transparency, and accountability, and we detail upon that. Monitoring mechanisms, measure to promote transparency and accountability in the management of public finances, very detailed rules on assets, revolving doors, prevention of conflict of interest, and so forth. And then, of course, we have Article 4 on specialized bodies with a very clear set of tasks and financial support, Article 5 and 6 with financial support and training, so that all of these mechanisms can actually function and have the resources that they need. Now, what is truly concerning is the general approach of the Council on the prevention dimension. There are, as I said, no clear obligations for member states and EU institutions regarding corruption prevention. What the Council does is that they opt for a much more reduced and diluted version of the directive's preventing provisions, even compared to the proposal of the Commission. The Council doesn't specify which action member states shall take to raise awareness on the harmfulness and impact of corruption, and they leave a huge margin of discretion to member states as to the preventive tools that they may put in place to prevent corruption. So the EP basically strengthened the shell clause proposed by the Commission. It listed specific prevention measures that include an anti-corruption strategy and open access to information of public interest, the rules on disclosure and management of conflict of interest, rules for disclosure and verification of assets, and interest of public officials, and rules on interactions between the private and public sector, and the Council reverses that. Also, the Council waters down obligation to regularly monitor corruption trends. We enforce that. Another major difference between the EP report and what you have now from the Council in the upcoming trilogue is that they do not foresee any obligation for the Union institutions, bodies, and agencies to set in place their own rules, mechanisms, and processes for the prevention of corruption. And also, there's no obligation to set up dedicated bodies specialized in prevention and repression of corruption. The Council basically deletes the requirement for member states to set up specifically dedicated bodies. I would stop here. I know the time is limited. I have another long list in front of me with examples on how the general approach basically waters down the proposal of the Commission and the proposal of the Parliament. But what I would like to say is that it is paramount for the Parliament in the upcoming mandate and for the Commission to keep the level of ambition of this proposal. I can see from the general approach of the Council that the negotiations will be very complicated. I can understand perfectly that we are, living times where some member states use blackmail sometime to dilute some of their issues and problems with corruption and non-compliance with EU law, so that they could agree with other proposals. And maybe we tend to close our eyes to some of these issues. But I think it is dangerous, and I think it sends a very bad signal for each and every member states and for third countries outside the Union that we are trying to convince that the anti-corruption fight and the rule of law matters. And this is a plea to the Council, to the Commission, and to the Parliament to continue this effort and to come up with a proposal that really matters and makes a difference. And it doesn't hurt more than it enforces what we have now and helps the anti-corruption fight. I truly hope to see that, and it's my message to all of you as well, to be aware of what is happening and to support this fight and to support our proposals and the proposals of our partners of Transparency International. We did an excellent work together, and I would like to commend this work. They were very proactive in addressing prevention of corruption and then provisions of the directive overall. We do need civil society and each and every actor to continue this fight. I truly hope that we will have good negotiations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I would like to ask Alina Njupipidi. You said that, and I quote, despite expectations that international concern and increased regulation would lead to less corruption, current trends suggest otherwise. Direct good governance interventions have had poor results. How does this directive respond to the need of a more effective anti-corruption tool in the preventive area?
Well, thank you for this. So as I already said earlier, providing unified norms and benchmark when you are in a common rule of law space is definitely useful. But this is not about effectiveness and implementation, but this is just like packing loopholes which exist now and which are really problematic, and double standards. In Romania, they sentenced a politician for 4 years for hiring someone who was de facto a press secretary of his political party in a public job at some agency which the party controlled. 4 years he went to jail for this, right? In European Parliament, routinely people use parliamentary assistance to actually do jobs in political campaigns and other things at country level. You know that in France there is a trial, but nobody was sentenced yet. In fact, there are notorious people who are advanced. I don't know, give name, you know. So you cannot have in one country someone go to jail for 4 years and in another you become governor of National Bank of France for exactly the same thing. That is something which I think the directive will help, because at least it will end this. This only feeds cynicism and makes our work absolutely impossible. But from here on to implementation is very complicated. So first I would say something like this. I think that good regulation should set targets. Countries should be told, here is where we want to get. This is acceptable behavior, this is unacceptable behavior. But then how you get there, if you really want to be effective, you should not tell them. Because countries are very different, you know. I mean, each of them have more or less degree of a policy problem with corruption. They have their different institutional settings, organizational settings, and we should not aim for monocropping. It's not like everyone, which is also an error that UNCAC does. You know, I assisted UNCAC when it was not yet 180 countries which adopted it, when it was like 100, and countries which adopted UNCAC had not made more progress than countries which didn't. Similarly with anti-corruption agencies, right? And countries which have anti-corruption agencies, I mean prosecuting agencies using the OECD classification, have not made more progress than countries which didn't, because none of these tools operate in a vacuum, right? Every country has to find its own solution how to get there. What can you do as a central body in Brussels? Well, you can set targets. You can say this is acceptable. This is abuse of office in Europe, okay? This is how we define it. This is how we bound it. You should all have this. Now, how much abuse of office you have, okay? And how do you get to this European target? In procurement, it's simpler, right? We should not have 25% single bidding as we have now. 10 years ago, it was 15%. What kind of single bidding we should have? I mean, knowing that these are basically corrupt tenders. Well, we should all have, let's say, 5%, like Ireland. This is why I created Europam, right? Not everyone, maps should not be uniformous. But we can also, you know, come up with outcomes. You should say this is the target. Everybody should be at the level of the best country. This is what we call in literature European goodness of fit. That's where we want to get. Maybe it's not realistic that we all set the Finnish standard. That's all right. Let's put it the Netherlands standard. Good enough. Okay, and let's aim for that. So I think it's a mistake to ask everybody to adopt similar institutions. This will lead to years of creating things, budgeting things, organizing things, which will only bury the entire effort instead of getting there. How to get there? Every country knows better, okay? Because everyone knows we should trust these countries. They're members of the European Union. Enough if we make them adopt the targets. So that, I think, is one danger, the monocropping. The second is that there are large areas that we do not control at all. And we have to think, does this directive touch them? Okay, right now, as we speak, if they sentence some top politician in Romania, it happened many times in the last years, now where do they come to get a lawyer to make them escape penalty? They come to Italy. And I'm not speaking 1, 2, 3 cases, but a lot. Out of 10 top politicians, they come here, there's a circuit of lawyers created in this country, right? And they manage to get off. For some reason, I mean, I don't need to tell you, from the European Parliament gang, they found a judge in Napoli who said that actually you cannot extradite someone. The tool existed, no? We have the European arrest warrant. So we have a tool. We have a tool, but it's not helpful because every judge in Napoli can decree that Belgian prisons are far worse than Napoli prison, and therefore we cannot extradite this gentleman to Brussels. Will this directive reach out to the judge in Napoli? Okay, that is what we have to think. We have to come up with realistic things. I'm not saying at all that we should, enforce it on everyone. You want to have a lawyer these days to defend you on money laundering? Well, everyone knows where to go. Go to Luxembourg. There are specialized firms out there, shining flags on the door. Everybody goes and gets there a lawyer to defend themselves. And we adopt money laundering directives one after another, thinking that this is what's going to enforce. So we are sort of missing this applied practical element, and we should a little bit think better on how we really achieve impact. Regulation in itself, the less it asks for, the more it puts target, and the less it prescribes how to get to target, I think the more effective it is, in my experience.
Thank you very much. Nicola, you have an extensive experience in private and public sector. We are happy to have you here. You told us about your zero tolerance manifesto, great idea. How do you think this proposed directive will help all of this?
Thank you, Laura. First of all, I will have just a little higher goal compared to what you said. So this is the assumption. So thank you for having me today. It's truly an honor to be here. Thank you to the President, to Laura, for the invitation. And Laura, I will go straight to the point. Businesses need to develop a long-term vision which considers both planet challenges and opportunities. In this regard, corruption is a global cross-cutting issue we must face together to guarantee a sustainable future and progress on long-term challenges. Today, the world has become liquid. It is extremely volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and as a consequence, targets are harder to achieve and results outside of ethical boundaries might be attractive, increasing the risk of corruption for corporations, increasing the importance of stabilizing the supply chain, increasing the need for renewed capacity building. Furthermore, the development of AI opened new loopholes for illegal and corrupt activities. And in this context, for the future, we need to focus on three key elements I was expecting to be included in the directive. First, cast a new vision as zero corruption. Second, leverage on people in terms of commitment and competencies. Third, use the right tools boosted by AI. 20 years ago, the vision was based on the belief that corruption could be managed or avoided. And it was seen as a matter of the private sector. We have to change the way we think about corruption. We have to break silos and break the bias that corruption cannot be eliminated. It is possible to eradicate it, and the multi-stakeholder approach is the way to reach the zero corruption target. When I think about people, as I said, I mean commitment and capacity building. 20 years ago, there was no dedicated function accountable for anti-corruption, and specific skills and capabilities were lacking. Today, the anti-corruption function should be considered as a key element of corporate governance, including not only legal and compliance professionals, but also data scientists, process engineers, subject and business matter experts, such as AI specialists. And this brings us to the third key point. We need these competencies to use effectively the right tools. In these years, we have implemented specific solutions to prevent corruption. I refer to responsible business conduct models, whistleblowing system, the promotion of free press and vigilant media, the use of tech for trust and transparency. But we should upgrade this tool through AI solutions that could be a game changer in the fight against corruption. We already have a new frontier on technological solutions. I'm referring to the generative AI. It is not the same as artificial intelligence. It generates original content with no need of complete and structured data. It is advancing quickly, and the solutions we have implemented so far probably are already obsolete. It requires new competencies in terms of reskilling, upskilling and change management, and it changes the vision on internal control, providing better quality, higher speed and more integration. At Autostrade per l'Italia, which is one of the largest motorway operator in Europe, we have adopted this vision, implementing an integrated and smart internal control system based on AI and generative AI. For example, we have implemented continuous monitoring solutions, analyzing 100% of available data, and the solution gives real-time results to the management, improving the decision-making process. Just to give you some numbers, we analyze more than 500 million of transactions per day on the procure-to-pay process, analyzing 100% of our suppliers, 100% of our payments every day. We are also implementing RITA, RITA stands for Risk and Integrity Technical Assistant. It is not just a tool to increase our compliance capacity, but she is like a new colleague with a brain able to develop models, make decisions, solve problems, with the eyes able to interpret their data, with the mouth able to speak the same language as humans, with two arms able to use analytical and technical instruments. But here the question is, does she have a heart? For this reason, we need to define shared standards to set responsible and ethical AI governance. This topic has been addressed in a paper recently issued by the B20 Brazil Integrity Compliance Task Force, which I have the honor to serve as co-chair representing Italy and Autostrade per l'Italia. And this is one of the next challenge that we have to face in the future. Honestly, I think that generative AI should be considered as a new stakeholder of corporations' governance, and the interest is to assure the balance between performance and compliance, results and rules, business and values. Because in this sense, generative AI can boost the implementation of anti-corruption solutions in our race to zero. And in this case, zero is a value, zero has a value, and zero must be a target as zero corruption. If we allow corruption to deprive the next generation of key resources such as education, healthcare, security and safety standards, environmental rights, social wellness, we will inflict an intolerable burden of inequality on our children. For this reason, we must have the courage to admit that it is possible to eliminate corruption and to give this target its proper dignity in the UN SDG agenda as a new SDG. In order to translate this commitment into action, the business at OECD, which is a network of over 10 million corporations in more than 55 countries, through its anti-corruption committee, which I have the honor to serve as chair, issued a manifesto which calls for the treatment of zero corruption as an 18th SDG. It is a multi-stakeholder paper that can be applied by public and private organizations, and it puts forward the 10 key actions to build a responsible and corruption-resistant global economy. In the future, we have to act together globally in order to have a more resilient, sustainable, real economy with zero corruption. Here, governments, businesses, civil society, international organizations must come together as equal partners in order to translate global commitments into tangible results and level the playing field. And I would like just to conclude with the essential truth about zero corruption summarized in 3 sentences. It's on, it's us, it's a must. It's on because zero corruption is already happening and we have pushed the bottom from off to on. It's us, only together can we make it happen, and it's a must because we do not have plan B. Thank you.
Jorge, thank you for being here. I very much like to hear about Transparency International position on the directive from you. I know you've been involved in this process very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with all of you our views on the process and the different proposals for the EU directive, anti-corruption directive. I like to complement what's been said already, but also address some of the issues that have been raised. But to start, we are actually now in the process of just finalizing our discussions with the chapters of Transparency International in every European country where we have to agree on our position for this new phase of the trialogue. No? Now we have the three different versions of proposals for the directive, the Commission's, the Parliament's, and the Council. And of course, we see where the ambition is going towards raising standards. No? I would like to just refer to what Ramon has mentioned. In terms of the variety of tools, the richness of the toolbox, the prevention toolbox, the European Parliament's compromise is really sets a very high standard, not only in the number of items. I counted up to 13, 14 different tools. I mean, from the very generic merit-based recruitment, etc., to very specific and groundbreaking, such as transparency of political finance, but also in the richness of details. And this is where I would like to also reflect on this very interesting idea of Alina, that it would be useful to have benchmarks or some indicators that could help us also improve this. So let me just summarize our position as follows. No? Because we've seen the Council's positions, and I will share the reflection of Ramona that is very concerning. It's very concerning because it really waters down even what the Commission had proposed in the first place. No? And we think that with the kind of ambition that the Parliament has set, we could prevent the next Scattergate in any of our countries. With the level of ambition that the Council is showing, we really doubt it. And let me just give two examples, no? And I'd like to focus on these two. So where the Parliament's position really has richness in level of details, the kind of benchmarks we could hold countries to account or to measure them up, are, for instance, interest representation and political finance. Interest representation is in every rule of law report, almost every of them, has a reference to lobbying laws or lobbying regulations, etc. We've counted up to 2023, because this year was published only a month ago or something like that. We haven't made the analysis yet, but for last year's rule of law reports, we counted that about 20 countries had received recommendations with regards to lobbying regulations. But they were so inconsistent to the point that, for instance, France, that has an excellent system that covers multiple stakeholders and a great level of detailed information, could be faulted because not a specific category of public officials is not covered by the laws, while Sweden, that has no regulation at all, is just praised because the culture of openness and transparency doesn't really make a requirement for them to actually have proper laws or regulations. No? There is no benchmark at all, and as a result, businesses across the European Union have to deal with this patchwork of rules, and then to comply with requirements in certain countries like Germany, France, Lithuania, etc., where there are very high-level requirements, but your competitors or other citizens may not have the same requirements in other countries. No? So the Parliament's position sets two words, no, that are very simple. A transparency register that the Council position doesn't even mention, and then it mentions the word all. All interest representatives should register in this transparency register. Only these two elements, even if they are watered down to those two key terms, would make a huge difference. We have, out of the 27 countries in the European Union, 17 of them have rules, some sort of rules. Only 15 of them, I think in only 15 of them, they are mandatory, and in like about 10 voluntary. As a result of this, voluntary schemes, etc., for instance, in a country of, I don't know how many people, Poland has 32, 33 million people. In Poland, just because the rules say that only private consultants should register, there are only 17 people registered in the Transparency Register of Poland. While in Germany you have, or France, 3,000 or 6,000 different interest representatives or public relations officials or professionals that are registered. So that's the level of the patchwork. So we need this kind of detail into the directive so we can really have great benchmarks. And just to finish, let me say, political finance, I think that's the boldest of all the elements that the European Parliament's position or the compromise presents. Almost every country in the European Union has a notion of transparency of political party funding in their own election laws or political party laws. However, because of the different ways this works in every country, the timeliness of the publication of the information, the threshold for disclosing the identity of a donor, and different understandings of corporate donations, whether they should be tied to a physical person or not, etc. An investigation that we supported indirectly through our Integrity Watch platforms this year, found out that between 2019 and 2022, out of every 10 euros that were donated by companies or individuals to political parties in the countries of the European Union, only 3 euros out of those 10 were disclosed with the identity of who donated that money. This meant that in those 3 years of the analysis, 660 million euros went unaccounted for. And so, don't get me wrong, there is transparency, but it's just that in some countries we find out who was the donor of an election year for a campaign only 2 years after the election. What's the point of having that? Of course, you can still go and do some scrutiny, but it doesn't allow voters to know whose views or interests they are voting for. And I think that also makes it very unfair for voters in Estonia or Lithuania, where there is high transparency of political finance, to know that they know who they're voting for, but they have no information about who the donors of candidates running in different countries are. I just wanted to mention these 2 examples, but these really show that the effort by the Parliament needs to be praised. The work by Ramona is very, very important, and in our positioning in the next phase of the discussions, we are certainly going to be choosing that as a minimum for improving this directive.
Thank you very much. President Buzia, my question is, how would the directive help anti-corruption agencies or authority like ours in preventing corruption, specifically with an eye to transparency?
Thank you. I will be brief because I spoke before. I think we all know, we all said that the difference, we have 3 texts. We have the Council, we have the Commission, Council, Parliament. They are very different. Each word that has been put inside the text or outside the text will change the game, and we have to work to try to have more precisely text, because of course is more important. But I think starting from the Commission and hoping, and our network will push, and one of the elements of our work, what we are projecting to do is trying to push and to collaborate, to elaborate with the European institution, giving them also the voice of our authority and civil society that work with us, because of course our authority live in very linked to what civil society is doing. And I think, starting from the Commission, if we see Article 4 of the directive, providing that every country has to have a specialized body and that has to be functionally independent is a very important element. Of course, we know that independency is the key element of our activity. Of course, it's not enough to write in the law. Also in a directive is important. I want to say that the good part is absolutely essential that we achieve and have a directive, because directive impose to the legislation, to the national legislator, some decision, and this is very important, and is also enforceable in front of the Court of Justice. So it's really an important element. And we know that it's not enough to say independency in a rule, in a law, in a directive. There is the need of concrete instrument to be given to the independent body. And I think the proposed directive from the Commission, hoping that at least we will have the level that the Commission proposal will be keep and not go too much on the other text. They put the importance and underline the importance to have qualified staff, to have financial and technical and technological instrument. This is a key element, because independency is not an abstract element, but need to have a concrete instrument. We know that in many countries, government have the possibility, maybe they have not the force in front of public opinion to change the law and say that they will abolish an authority, a body, or cut in their power, but they can cut the budget because there is some need of restriction. Putting and trying to put these rules more precisely as possible is important. But there is, I think, after the directive, and we have all together to work to have a good directive, but there is also a room after the directive of implementation and the creation of a network of authority that will work together and will show which is the standard, the minimum standard to achieve of concrete instrument that each authority have to have is real important to push national legislation. And I think our force will be to highlight which is the common standard, to create European common standard, and also to create rules are not enough. We have to work to change our culture, to push institutions, national institutions, because European institutions are more open of that, to understand that is on the real interest of Europe. If Europe has the power to present itself as a model of prevention of corruption, has a lot of standard to attract investment. We know all the benefits of having strong commitment. Europe in this field was not so present worldwide. UNODC, Council of Europe were more present. Now is the moment that Europe demonstrates its commitment, and we are here as ENPE. We have to use this occasion and push European institutions to put more work, to be more precise, because this is in the interest of all our countries, is in the interest of European institutions.
And now we have
good morning. I'm Monica Bessa Correia, member of the board of the Entity for Transparency, Portugal. My question is a little bit specific, but I was curious, and it's for Mr. Nicola Aloca. Well, you spoke about your, very enthusiastically about artificial intelligence and the models of artificial intelligence as a means to avoid corruption. And I was thinking that one of the huge problems of artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, is that humans that create them don't really know how they learn and how they come to conclusions. Once they are created, they develop themselves and they can really generate. That's why they are generative. And I was thinking, since you know the beginning of artificial intelligence, but you don't really know how those conclusions are reached, how do you integrate in your risk model the risk of civil liability regarding your institution? And I was thinking, well, for privates, maybe it's easier in a model of civil liability to find where the damage was originated. But for public institutions such as the one I'm representing, it could be tricky to find a liable person for that solution, that specific solution. And how would we be, in jurisdictional terms, how could we rely on that specific solution, and who is the author of the public decision?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I have a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is the responsibility is under the manager. So even if you have artificial intelligence tools inside the organization, there is always a human reviewer of the output of artificial intelligence, and this should be included in the governance. The long answer, 2 years ago, as a business at OECD, we issued a paper on the importance of technology in the fight against corruption, and we addressed this issue, underlines the risks, challenges and opportunities, providing also recommendations to the OECD countries. And there are 4 main issues related to the use of artificial intelligence into organizations. We have ICT issues, so of course related to the availability and the reliability of data, and also we need the proper digital infrastructure to use the data. The second issue is regarding people in terms of skills and competencies that you need to use the artificial intelligence, but also to understand what is behind the algorithm in order to identify the right responsibility. Third is a cost issue. I mean, we need upfront investments in order to build these digital infrastructures. And the fourth is a sort of regulatory issues related to privacy, security, and governance of AI. This is the latest point. We should identify shared standards in order to set ethics and the rules under the governance of AI if we want to trace the responsibility within the organizations.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Lorenzo Segato. I'm a researcher. I have 2 quick questions, if I can. We work on the ground, I would say, so we work with the public administrations that have to set up and apply anti-corruption measures, so they have to put the law in practice. And about digitalization and artificial intelligence, which is the new magic word, I would say, we see that the digitalization process in the public administration is still ongoing, and now a new transformation is coming. But there's a lack of skills and competencies within the public administration. So the question is, do you think that digitalization or artificial intelligence can make prevention of corruption more effective to justify public investments on this? And public investments should go more on buying AI services or upgrading capacity, so internal investment. And this is one question. And the second question, I would say for President Busia, we know about the new directive which is under discussion. I really appreciated that everyone is talking about prevention of corruption. We really believe on that. But we know that some member states are not all the member states are aligned on that. So they may try to put anti-corruption under the justice system, so repression, or they want to control anti-corruption agency, maybe at national level. So what the anti-corruption authority and maybe the network can do to ensure that the new directive will maintain this focus on prevention and possibly towards a uniform and standardized preventive approach, as Professor Mungiupipidi was saying. Thank you very much.
And the first question was addressed to?
The first question, I would ask Alina.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, yes, of course, digitalization can help a lot. We have a global correlation between online services and control of corruption, so the more digital, the better it is. But let's not be over-optimistic, you know, because also the other guys use digitalization very well. World Bank tried to upscale in Africa the random distribution of custom checks with an IA tool, which seemed to work very well. In the first year, the revenues of customs increased. I mean, it's just like in the judiciary, distributing cases randomly. It's distributing control randomly. So truck drivers do not know who does, okay? But in the second year, revenues started to go down, actually. So what is going on? Wiring, surveillance, classic methods, not digital methods. And then they figure out that the IT department has changed the algorithm, and they isolated 3% of the largest values thing, and those were going to the right people for control. Okay, but so it's not the digitalization in itself which does the trick, but two things I would say are important for Europe. One is cooperation. We are discussing here like every country is at itself, but in the end of the day, why is it me from my 6 million horizon, which it's true is generous, but it's a research find. Why is it me who interconnect registers of commerce? These days, if you go on follow the money, just follow the money and bridge gap, our project, you will be able to search in more than 20 registers of commerce by name of companies, by name of officials, by name of sanctioned persons. But this is something that countries should do, you know, who have far more means than us researchers. Now we do this with an Ukrainian company because they were very motivated to look for oligarchs and they started this motor, okay? And they're funded by our research project and by Pentagon. This is what Europe should do. Europe should interconnect land cadastres. I mean, how do we look for assets? Registers of commerce. That's not a business of a limited time research project. And this would really help a lot. The second thing is that public management exists out there. We created the tool, the single bidding. You know, I used to stay in my Berlin office and I was looking at Prozoro, which is model for one of our research project in Ukraine, and could see single bidding by contracting authority from my office. So I would see who's very corrupt and who is not. And Ukrainians would complain and say, oh, now we have the most transparent system in the world, but it's also the most corrupt. No, it's not the fault of Prozoro. Prozoro did the best. What should happen next is that the minister in that area, the head of the agency of this area, would immediately act when they see these indicators and punish the head of the respective agency. In fact, the performance of public managers should be tied to corruption indicators. You know, we cannot provide the rest of part. I can calculate it for us, but for the rest, it's humans who manage human administration.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think, of course, that the role is not easy. Each process, political process, like to achieve a directive, is a complicated process, and we see the different elements. I think that the authority has the possibility to bring their experience, bring also the relationship that they have, as I said, with civil society organizations, NGOs, and bring also, and this is the strongness that come from to be a network, that there is a common feeling, a common rules that are not yet written, but they are very common in many countries. And the authority want to see these rules written in a directive to guarantee this level. So I think, very briefly, that our role and also our responsibility in this moment is to try to work together. Together is important to push the European institution to not lose this occasion, because it's a unique occasion, and I think that the role of the authority is also the role to try to create a network that is not only a network of the authority, but a network of all stakeholders, all interest bodies, also the one that not see at the moment that is in their interest to have a strong regulation of prevention of corruption.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes. Yes?
I just wanted to add an idea I wanted to share when I first spoke, but I also wanted to say that I see that the European Network for Public Ethics can play an immense role in this discussion, in this debate, but also not only for harmonization purposes, but also in other fora where there are countries outside the European Union that really want to step up their game. This directive, if well shaped and formed, can really set a very good standard for other regions outside the European Union. The UNCAC COSP is one of those forums where some coordination from the European preventative bodies could also be very much welcome. Just wanted to say that and also offer, of course, our support for that coordination.
Thank you, Lourdes. So we have a person here, then two people there. Please.
Eddie Boutmans from the Belgian Federal Ethics Commission. Several of you mentioned the very big gap between the position of the Parliament and of the Council. It is rather easy to know who in the Parliament was active on these matters. But how about the Council? Who did most to water down the strength of the measures, and who was more defending it, or is that not a public matter?
Thank you. And the person you want to respond is?
The one who knows. Maybe the academic, I think, Alina.
I don't think she's here. Ramona? Just asking if you're still with us. I don't think so. In a rush. So I'm afraid.
Can you?
Alina? Oh, Ramona?
Can you hear me?
Hi, we can. Have you heard the question?
Yes, and I was actually getting ready to run. Apologies, but I heard a question, and I will try to answer it quickly, and then to thank you all for inviting me again and providing me with this great opportunity. I think it's irrelevant who wants to water down in the Council, because there are several member states with very different position. We know that traditionally there are some member states who are defending each and every time measures against corruption, against money laundering, strengthening, and they position themselves every time for strengthening this framework for transparency and for countering organized crime, so on and so forth. And it's almost a pattern. You have the traditional suspects And then you have those member states who are literally promoting a culture of integrity, and also they're quite dedicated to law enforcement and to anti-corruption and countering terrorism and organized crime. But I think that that's not the point to do finger pointing and say, those are guilty and these are the best ones, because in the end, you need unanimous decision. And you need to align all of these member states with a position that is closer to all of our work, that is closer to the position of the Commission, and come up with a proposal which is strong. I do not think it is wise to do finger pointing. What I think is that we need to provide constant pressure to all of these member states, and I hear talk about all of the voices, and yes, the European Parliament supports that approach. Civil society broadly supports this approach. Each and every advocate for this ambitious position should provide the message publicly, should write to the member states, should talk to their sperm reps, and demand for a negotiation and an outcome of the negotiations which is aligned with the ambition, the declared ambition of the institutions and of the union. Because otherwise, we're just talking words. And we will never get to that point where we say, look, we do have a solid framework, we do have good legislation in place, complemented by the efforts that the member states are doing nationally to enforce this legislation. And I agree 100% with a lot of the statements that Alina had, that it is not enough to only have good legislation in place, that it doesn't help to have a strong regulatory framework if other things are not functioning, and that some things take years and years. But we also know that very simple things help a lot in prevention of corruption. In public procurement, the very basic principle, follow the money. To know where the money is and how it is spent every time, it helps tremendously in fighting corruption. It helps tremendously in countering money laundering as well, and I've seen it in all of these years. Then yes, using digitalization and simplification, having access to information and beneficial ownership registers, transparency registers, all of this helps tremendously in fighting corruption. And this is something that member states should understand and apply at national level, and at the same time keep this level of ambition for the European outcome and for these negotiations. So do it with each and every one of them. I would not want to say they are guilty, they are great. I would want to tell them all, and I would love you to tell them all, that this effort needs to be done, and those that are less ambitious, or that have major remarks now regarding the legislation, should reconsider and align themselves with the ambitious ones. And I think this is done through negotiation and through public pressure and through each and every instrument that we can use. I don't want to make them feel guilty. I want to make them feel more ambitious.
Thank you so much, Ramona. Next question was there, and then Sonia.
Good morning. I'm Pierpaolo Romani. I'm the director of Avviso Pubblico, a network, an Italian network of 600 municipalities committed in prevent corruption and organized crime. A question for President Busia, but also for other speakers. I would like to ask you this question, President. How much can a good lobbying discipline affect public sector integrity? Thank you.
Thank you. Difficult question.
Thank you. Big question, an important question. Thank you for this question, because it's really an important element. And unfortunately, I have to say, in Italy, we don't have a regulation of lobby, and we need it. We have to push to have that. I think that it's important to regulate lobby. specifically ensuring transparency. Transparency in, of course, all the financial element, putting some limit, is a very long, we all know how is important, but the answer is yes, of course, it's fundamental. It's fundamental to also recognize the role of lobbies, but to make them transparent and to make it, to create channels that are given to all the lobbies, the most powerful and the less powerful, to be used, and to be used in a transparent way to allow to bring to the public person that has to decide the possibility to have an option and to motivate these choices. So we have to create, I think one of the most important things, there are many instruments, many tools, but one of the most important things is to create transparent channels, open also to the less powerful lobbies, because the most powerful have no need to use this instrument, or blind the person that has to decide to motivate and show which is the decision. This is a key element to also put in a higher level the level of participation of the citizen, participation and the level of democratization of all the decisions.
Thank you. We have Sonia and then Valentina. Yes.
Okay. I'm Sonia Levstik from the Italian Anti-Corruption Authority. I would like to pose two questions. The first one is for President Buzia, but also for Mr. Valadares or other speakers. The European Parliament's report on the Anti-Corruption Directive proposes the creation of an EU anti-corruption coordinator to adopt the EU's anti-corruption strategy and interact with member states. The European Economic and Social Committee also suggests that the Union should set up an anti-corruption agency along the lines of what has already been done in other policy areas where the EU and member states share competence, like competition, data protection, money laundering. Do you think that an EU anti-corruption authority is needed? And if so, why? And the second question is for Professor Bunju Pipili. The Parliament's report reintroduces the EU anti-corruption report, which was presented by the Commission in 2014 and published only once. Does this proposal by the EU Parliament in any way suggest that the annual rule of law report is not a sufficiently effective tool?
Thank you.
Okay. If I understood the question, if we need a European anti-corruption authority, I think it could be important to have in other processes at the European level. After having and creating an harmonization of rules at the European level, then there is the need to offer creation of European authority. I think it could be a good idea. In some cases, the creation was the coordination of the national authorities that goes to Brussels and coordinated the effort, and in many cases they achieve along the year. I have presented the idea of the process that allow in data protection field the authority to come to Brussels to coordinate themselves, and then they became a body that have also decisional power, a possibility to decide. So I think it will be a process. But as we will have, and we hope to have, common standard at European level, then we will need to have a strong coordination as a strong, the more this coordination will be stronger, the more we will have the possibility to be effective and to pass from the rules to a common work. And this is important also and more specifically for the difficult decision that the authority has to take at national level. Because if you have the, if you work under the umbrella of a more, of an European authority and you can put at national level the common feeling of the other authority, you have more power to impose your decision and to explain and communicate that. So I think it will be absolutely an objective to have that. I think it will be a progress, but we have to take step by step, knowing that the objective is that.
Thank you. Alina, on the rule of law report.
Yeah, well, thank you for this question. Being a professor of transparency, I will not beat around the bush and explain a little bit what the process is on both the defunct anti-corruption report and on the still existing rule of law report. So when we created this anti-corruption report for the first time, there was the original idea to create it on the basis of indicators on which to evaluate countries. But then, of course, since it was, although it was just a communication of the committee, of the commission, there was no powerful tool than that, just a communication of the commission. However, there were very strong political influences at play, and in the end it was decided that that's not going to be based by indicators, but it's going to be a qualitative mechanism where country authors submit something, that something goes around in all directorates, all the countries are consulted, and returns in the end and is published. So we sent around 2 pages on Luxembourg, made by people who are expert on Luxembourg and who are very critical, and it returned like 2 lines in which it said Luxembourg is a country of fantastic integrity and we should all live there. Following this, I wrote a very critical memorandum explaining that without a methodology we cannot do this. I also argued that on the model of our webpage opentender.eu, where, by the way, we look at the council, and if the council standards have more risk or less risk than any individual country, because we can do this, right? They're transparent tenders. So I also argued that European institutions, like the Parliament, you've seen what happened, should also be monitored, not just member states, and that we can create enough objective measurements to do this. But this was, of course, unacceptable, and that's a totally political mechanism. Until the last office, you actually do not know what will be in the report. It just goes around and then it's published. And this turned around, I left this. I was chairing this group. I resigned, I left, but Frans Timmermans, after that, closed down the anti-corruption report. Anyway, Netherlands had always been a guest, and they said there is no objective way of doing this, why just create another political tool? But then with the rule of law report, they revived it, they called absolutely the same mechanism, they basically transferred the mechanism, you see, the mechanism existed, the money were allocated, some people were paid for it, and the whole issue restarted all over, but it's exactly the same mechanism. It's still there, it goes on there, so the issue is not how we call it, rule of law report or anti-corruption report. How can we do things like this? How can we evaluate ourselves for corruption? That's very difficult. What I would suggest is that we do it as the World Bank did when they had the issues of corruption of the doing business report, corruption by Saudi Arabia, by China, and Azerbaijan, so politically inflatable. They just hired an external company of lawyers, and the external company of lawyers produced this Wilmer Hale excellent report, which found that doing business was actually crooked due to political influence, and it was shut down. So we need a company which doesn't have EU money, which doesn't want to have EU money, and which has a reputation of investigator, some kind of lawyer company. All right, and that is also the recommendation I made to the European Parliament when the head of the socialist group asked me and the person from Transparency International Portugal if we can somehow screen the socialist MEPs after the Qatar scandal. And you know, at the moment too, there was fantastic opposition of the idea of someone coming. I said, no, call a lawyer company. Call a lawyer company, everybody should submit because they wanted to know risk liability, you know. You don't know how many other people were there, like Kali and Panseri and whatever. If we have the muscle to do this, then let's do this. If not, let's stop claiming that we do something, to be honest, because we're not doing anything which is objective and helps. Sorry.
Thank you, Anina. And back to the first question, Jorge. Sorry, you wanted to add something?
Absolutely. It's a very interesting question on both the platform and the coordinator. And I just wanted to say that at Transparency International, we are interested in the notion behind it. We see that the value of the platform could be really, really instrumental for the transposition period, at least, because it provides a space for comparing and harmonizing different regulations. For the transposition period, maybe anything between 18 months to 36 months, because the Council actually stepped it up. The position of the coordinator, I find very interesting your response, because I think the notion behind it is very useful, because it could provide a focal point for addressing issues that concern the implementation of the directive. But I think if there are other instruments that are already working and working well, perhaps we should support those, even if they are outside the scope or the institutionality of the Commission or the Brussels infrastructure.
Thank you so much. And we have one last question, I think, because it's already 1:05. Please, Valentina.
Thank you very much. I'm Valentina Donini, National School of Administration, and also the spokeswoman for the Italian Open Government Forum. I just wanted to share with you the latest initiatives that have been embedded in the 6th National Action Plan for Open Government in Italy, because, I stand up is better, because as Pierpaolo Romani noted, and as I really appreciated the answer of President Busia, lobby is a crucial subject, and transparency of decisional process is also as crucial. So we made a commitment in this National Action Plan that you can find online on the OGP website, and this commitment implies the publication of agendas, so it's an open agenda commitment, which is very important. We had the endorsement of the Ministry of Public Administration, and we are trying to spread this best practice, because it's very important in order to spread integrity and transparency of decisional processes. And I really hope that we can meet the collaboration, and I also talked to Avviso Pubblico, because it's such important for local municipalities, and we can talk afterwards if you want, because we really need the collaboration of administrations. In Italy, ANAC, the national authority, already publishes its agenda, and also some ministries that do, the Ministry of Economic Development, but it is important to spread this practice, which is also very simple and not so expensive, but it reveals the will to spread integrity and transparency. Just a comment.
So, someone wants to add anything? We are okay. I would like to thank you for listening all morning and for asking questions. I would like to thank all our guests, especially who followed us from the very morning until now, and all of you for participating to this event. And I would like to ask Mr. Busia to say two words, closing remarks.
Don't worry, only 2 words, no conclusion. The first is thank you. Thank you very much to all the speakers, all the participants, all of you. It was a great morning of very inspiring, very interesting. Thank you really for contributing and make it possible, and of course, thank you for all the organizers of this meeting. The second word is cooperation. We need cooperation at all levels. No one of us, no one of our organization, no one of our states has the possibility to achieve the objective that we have. Now is the momentum for Europe, for prevention of corruption in Europe. We have to cooperate all together to achieve this historic objective. So let's work together. Thank you for doing that. And this morning, give us the, let us more optimistic on the possibility to collaborate together. If we keep together, to work together, I hope we will have the possibility to achieve our objective. Thank you so much.